welcome everybody for joining us tonight. It's so nice to see so many new faces. And to introduce myself, I'm Mavis Robinson, and I'm with the Bourne Historical Society. We're a historical society that our mission is to preserve, protect, present the history of the town of Bourne. We run museum rooms in this building at the Historic Center, and then also the Uptuxet Trading Post. So we've got a dual mission there. We're split between two spots. And as part of our mission, we like to do these historical informative lectures. And this lecture is the final one for the year. So we're really thrilled to be doing this lecture. This is a real special one because this includes an artifact that is in the possession of the Bourne Historical Society, the Bourne Stone, which many of our members are familiar with. And also it includes us in the Massachusetts celebration of Archaeology Month. So Archaeology Month is a month that's celebrated at schools, libraries, museums, all across Massachusetts, and having this lecture be about petroglyphs and mysterious carvings allows us to be part of that celebration. So we are going to be discussing the Bourne Stone and other inscriptions that are considered mysterious in the Northeast. So please join me in welcoming Michael Gerard.
So welcome to the presentation, Stories in Stone. My name is Mike Gerard. I've been exploring the Northeast for over 30 years, and in that time, I've actually found some incredible natural features and some fascinating history that has been long forgotten or lost out in the forest, in the mountains and valleys of the Northeast. What I typically am out going to explore for, my key thing I look for is lost caves. That's been a priority for me for a long time. And the caves that had some kind of historical significance is attached to some history, lore, legend. It had some cultural significance, spiritual, just popular to visit, and so on. So I prefer ones that are colonial or pre-colonial with Native Americans. So there's a lot here, a lot more than you realize. But one of the things is when you're out exploring, you stumble on things you don't expect. Animals being one of them, and insects. I see a lot of interesting animals and insects that most people never get to see, and sometimes a little more up close than I want to. But the other thing I stumble on is inscriptions and petroglyphs, because it makes sense. You have a cave or a geologic feature that was popular, whether for spiritual or just recreational reasons. People like to leave their mark. You find it all the time. Totally by accident, I stumble on them at the locations I'm looking for, or sometimes along the way. So, about 30 years ago, I started documenting them. This became like my cabinet of curios. I'd show it to my friends in stories. I'd say, show pictures. I didn't really understand the value and also how fragile they were at the time. And the more I collected them and documented them, and I was very, very low-key documentation, not really taking it seriously, the more I dug into their history and realized that these are important artifacts. And we're losing them quickly. We don't have good conditions here for petroglyphs and inscriptions. The Midwest, fantastic, dry, and also, dry is the key thing. Dry, not a lot of rain, not a lot of exposure from freezing and so on. So they last much longer than up here. Up here, they quickly are destroyed by the elements. So about 2012, I started actually taking this much more seriously. So since then, I've actually found, and it didn't advance. See, that's what happens when you don't click on the screen. There we go. Now it should do it when I click. Oops. If I click the right one, there we go. So since then, I've probably documented just on paper over 200, maybe about 250. Most of them, though, I haven't really done deep research and cataloging on. Maybe only about half of those I've actually put in, indexed in some way with information and history, and probably only about 40 of those I've actually visited, because a lot of these are hard to find. They've been lost. Other ones that haven't been lost are just difficult to be able to document. I can be right on top of them. I've actually found one recently I walked over. Last time I went there, I could not see it because of the way the sun was shining on the rock. So these are going to be lost over time. So I realized we have to document them. So that's why about a year ago, I started an expedition with National Geographic Open Explorer. So what I've been doing is going out and now doing serious documentation of all the petroglyphs and inscriptions that I know of, and redoing ones I've visited already, and bringing new technology to them that really will revolutionize our documenting and investigating and analyzing inscriptions. I'll show you some of that later, and I want you to know the technology I'm going to show you is available to everyone. You can either get it for free or if you want to pay a little more, for about $100 or so bucks, you can get some of this software top quality. So this is going to revolutionize being able to make people like us become part of the community. What I do actually does often feed back to the archaeological and geological community in a scholarly manner. So this is definitely, we can become, in a sense, citizen scientists for the people out there, for the historians, archaeologists, and geologists. So before I get into talking about the Bourne stone, I just want to talk about the subject of inscriptions in our area. And I'm going to be very general. This is a deep subject, so there's only so much I can say within the hour I have. So I don't think that everything I say, that's all there is, and that's the end-all answer for these things. There's a lot more for you to investigate if you're really interested. So I'm going to break it down to two different types I see: Native American petroglyphs and European inscriptions. So Native American, pretty much, I define anything that's Native American as petroglyphs that go back from prehistoric Native American settling in America all the way to modern. I mean, if a modern Native American went out and using tools and symbols of the past did a petroglyph, I would still consider that Native American. So it's more, it has to have all the characteristics of it. And European, I consider it has European, history behind it, using the same kind of symbols and so on, that we can see it's, drawn from European traditions. So that colonists did. And possibly, I know some people believe they're pre-European visitors, which is possible, and those would be categorized in that. So anything any person considers pre-European visitation for Europeans, I should say pre-colonial for Europeans, that would fit into that category too. But I consider the Native American petroglyphs the most important. And there's a key reason why. Because you have to understand, when we talk about European, they have a meaning, they have a purpose that tells us something about the people who did them, maybe even the location they did them at. It tells a little bit about their story and their history in America. But that's not the only source we have. We also have journals, we also have newspapers, we have books, we have pictures, we have illustrations, we have stories handed down from generation to generation. We have so many ways to access this history. Sure, these inscriptions that are European-based inscriptions will maybe have information we can't get from those sources, but we're not left empty-handed. We have so much. We can even trace back to connections to Europe. We can start seeing history that connects to what we see here and tells us part of the story. Native American, we can't do that. Native Americans in New England did not have a written language. They had symbols, but I mean written language as in text, like this. Words, they did not have that. They did not have a recorded history. The best they had was the symbols they used to communicate ideas and information. They put on stone, they put on fabrics and pottery and so on. And I can't speak to how much is on those that we have in museums, but I'll tell you, in the scope of what we have on documentation in European compared to Native American, we have very little with Native Americans. So this is a piece of history we're going to lose. And what makes it even more important is the fact that even though symbols can be used on fabrics and pottery and on rock that are the same, there was some importance to location. So certain symbols and certain motifs were only used at certain locations because there was spiritual meaning to them or cultural meaning. So we will only be able to capture that history and that information from those locations. So as we lose those, we're losing a big part of Native American history. And that's why we need to start documenting these things. So with that said, this is actually on what's called Arrow Hill, I believe, in New Hampshire. There is actually a series of arrows there that's believed to be Indian petroglyphs. So before I go on, I just want to show you some examples. So I was talking just a moment ago about Eldon's Cave. It's great. We know the history. We know the story. It's a beautiful story about a boy who discovers a cave in 1875. He actually carved that in there himself. It's a big piece of history. It's in the middle of the woods. No one would know where it was unless you knew the right people to talk to. It is totally lost. Fortunately, recently it became part of a protected property. The landowner now worked with the state, so it is protected, but access is very limited to that. But that eventually will vanish. And inside that cave, there's carvings from beginning to end, from the 1800s on to modern times. So there's a history throughout the entire cave, 900 feet of cave. This is Indian petroglyphs that are found in Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island. This is 1975. I went to see it. This is the one I walked over. I didn't see it because it's so weathered that it's almost gone. I barely could see it when I finally discovered it this past visit, just within the past month. So we've lost a piece of history here. There's meaning behind this we may never be able to capture, because even though we have pictures and illustrations, there's a reason why this doesn't tell the whole story. I'll talk a little bit about that in a while. This is actually an Indian petroglyph. It shows a great history because there's actually on that same rock many Indian petroglyphs going from Stone Age to modern, and also colonial to modern times. So we see a layering of history of people using that same rock. It's called mark rock, and it's actually covered by sand now. You can't see it anymore. So you have to, I actually dug up it at one point to see some of it, but the water on the shore just puts it back over it. So we're losing that history. This is in Bridgewater. That's from a reverend. He has 2 stones he put poems on in Bridgewater. We think there are more of them. He was a very intelligent man. He was very skilled at carving. There's more to be found, but again, these are lost. And so a couple more. Here's another Indian one. This is Lakeville. There's several around that same area. This one looks so well kept. It's so funny. You see some. This looks well kept. That's the 1700s. That's in a neighborhood in Byfield. The family back in the 1700s paid a man to make that for them. He actually did gravestones. And we're so lucky. This granite actually has lasted so well. And what a fantastic piece of art from the 1700s. Most people in that area don't know it even exists. They drive by it every day and they can't see it. The landowners who own it now are aware of it, though. This is actually an interesting piece of history here. That's Smallpox Cave in Massachusetts. Smallpox patients, when they were recovering from their smallpox, this is when the earliest version of inoculation was happening. It's basically they scrape the skin, they give you a little bit of smallpox, and good chance you would probably survive. If you did, once you even were over it, you're still contagious, so they have to do something with their time. So what do? They went out in the woods. They played cards, they hung out, they talked, and they did inscriptions in rock. There's 4 locations in New England where people have done that. One of them has 60 inscriptions and artwork on it. That was fantastic pieces of art. And that's an interesting piece of history to see a peek inside the lives of these people who suffered through that smallpox epidemic. Now, most people don't know anywhere where these things are out in the woods. The one that actually has 60 is in Connecticut. That's something that really we need to get to document. This one in Massachusetts, it is being weathered away. It has the name of the man on it. It was 1770 something, 78, I believe. Actually, it might be earlier than that, because the smallpox inoculations happened more during the early 1700s, so that may be more of 1718. And then this one's fascinating, because what does it look like? Dragon. Some people have seen that, and they say, a dragon, Chinese have come here. Oh my God, it's evidence of Chinese. There are other dragons in the States. It's an Indian petroglyph. They actually worship a deity that was like a snake. And sometimes their drawings are, or their petroglyphs are like dragons. This rock actually is religiously or spiritually significant to them. All over that rock, there's spiritual petroglyphs. That's in Maine. That one also being destroyed. There's not, I don't know how much, probably within my lifetime, a lot of it will wash away. So, with that said, so there's many we know about, and some of them are still hard to read, but the ones that people find most interesting are the mysterious inscriptions, the ones that people think mean many different things, and probably the king of the stones in New England is like that, is the Dighton Rock. To this day, people still argue who made it, when was it made. So it's really popular with the public, but generally archaeologists will tell you it is Indian petroglyphs, with also some possible colonial graffiti on it. But I'm not going to really get into the discussion of what exactly it is. I'm going to focus more on Bourne rock when we do that. But one of the key reasons why these stones are mysterious is because not only, like in this case, it's so crowded with art. Also, the Dighton rock is very weathered. It's hard to read. It's hard to understand what's there. And I come across that often where I'll see inscriptions, and just because of the way I'm looking at it from the sunlight, I notice it's there. If I didn't see it from that direction, I'd lose it totally. And it's hard to tell what they are. Sometimes I've spent hours just sitting there looking at things, trying to figure out what is there. And sometimes your imagination can go wild, and you may be guessing. You may see things there that aren't there, or you may be seeing correctly. That's the hard part. There's a way to kind of work that out so you get a better idea of what's there. And the great thing is that there's many different stories that come from them. There's stories about stones that are maps to treasure in Massachusetts. In Byfield, Mass, there's a stone on a balanced rock that has an A on it, and they say that it marks that there's a treasure buried somewhere nearby by a pirate. There's other ones that are said to be symbols and directions about paths and trails done by Indians, or markings from local people with weird goings-on out in the forest. So there's many different interpretations, all really interesting to entertain. And we're always discovering new ones. I'm not sure, does anyone ever see this one? Newly discovered, 2012 about. We call it In Hoc Signo Vinci's rock. Does anyone recognize that? Yep. Yeah, so IHS. And it means, with this, roughly translates, so with this sign you will conquer. Constantine saw that up in the sky. When he looked up at the sun, he saw the cross and he saw those words. So this is like a key historic moment about Christian history recorded. Who did it though? We don't know. There's no date on it. There actually was some inscription here. We are still trying to tweak it, coax it out with the technology we have, but it's hard to see. But it's very weathered. It's in a tide zone. I can guess how old I think it is. I can guess who did it. It's Latin. Anyone could have done it. Someone from Europe could have done it. Someone who visited before the colonists could have done it. Could have been Templar Knights. And you know what? Some people think it is Templar Knights. Some people think it's signs that the Norse had come here. So this is a fun mystery that really needs to be investigated. So whatever inspires you to investigate it, whether you think it's Norse or you think it's colonial, if it gets you to do the research, I think that's great. There's just a lot of tools you can do with it. But this, that's in Newport. That's in Newport, close to the Newport Bridge. It's in the tide zone. So I'm going to be going down soon and doing more pictures of it to coax out the inscription. So if you go to the blog I have, or the Facebook page, or actually my expedition I'll show you, you can see some good models of it. I'll show you what the models kind of look like at the end. So the idea, though, of these inscriptions being from a foreign country before colonists is not new. Starting in the early 1700s, that was the obsession of scholars all over New England. And they would come mostly to the Narragansett Basin in southeastern Massachusetts, and they would look at inscriptions. This was really popular. People were fascinated with Indian petroglyphs, which they interpreted as being other than Indian, or other inscriptions that may not have been Indian. This is actually a map of locations explored by Reverend Ezra Stiles. He was a Yale graduate, Newport's resident, Reverend, eventually Yale president, and he documented interesting things all over New England and visited all of these stones with inscriptions across the Narragansett Basin. Most of them he thought were Phoenician. People who followed him thought they may be not Phoenician, but they might have been it went on to Phoenician, then Chinese, then medieval, and so on. So different groups coming here had different ideas over the years. It kept changing. But you notice that the popular choice now is what? Norse, Viking. And there's a reason why. It's a good reason. And I want this as a warning for when you're investigating. Now, could there be Viking inscriptions in New England? Absolutely, they could be. That's possible. They did make it to, was that Lawrence Meadows? I always pronounce it wrong, in Newfoundland. They could have made it here. So I'm not going to deny that it's possible. But don't let popular culture get you, because starting in the late 18th century and 19th century, we had what's called a Viking revival. That's when they started translating the sagas. And when they translated the sagas, people got excited. You know what we thought Vikings or Norse were like, or Scandinavians? I guess Vikings isn't necessarily the best term. We thought they were brutes, going out, pillaging and stealing and conquering and so on. And when they translated the sagas, they suddenly saw them differently, a more romantic vision. They were farmers. They were communities. They were men and women with families. They were explorers. They were colonizing new areas, trying to really make it big, to stretch out and be able to survive and prosper. So people loved that. They got on the bandwagon with it. It was in the newspapers. It was in the magazines. It was in, in books that were being published, scholarly papers. People ate that up. And then lots of archaeologists started doing investigating of areas like UK and so on for Norse artifacts. And they found them, lots of them, including stones with inscriptions on them. Here in America, though, we're feeling kind of left out. People are getting on the bandwagon, the romantic feeling about the Scandinavians, about the Norse, and we get nothing here until they started looking at all the rocks that they thought were Phoenician before or Chinese, and then suddenly when they started looking at them, suddenly, oh my God, they're Norse, they're Viking. So don't let that get you, because here's one. Ezra Stiles thought this was Phoenician, eventually they thought it was Viking. That's the one I showed you earlier that I said is wearing out. It's Indian petroglyphs. Here's one in Rhode Island I've documented. That was originally thought to be Phoenician. Eventually they believed it was Viking. And this is actually from 1880. So that one was 1768 drawing, 1880 drawing. This is recent. This is on no man's land. Everyone here know no man's land? It's south of Martha's Vineyard, a little island. You saw when they dropped the bombs on. Don't go on the island. There's a lot of unexploded ordnance on it. But on the shores of there is an inscription that is believed to be Viking inscription. Some people say it's a hoax. Some other people still think it's definitely Viking or Norse. And of course, the Bourne stone. Bourne stone went through a whole slew of ideas what they thought it was. But one of those people believed that it was Norse. And some people today still believe it's Norse. Now, could any of these actually be? Absolutely, they could be. We have to look at the evidence to validate whether or not. But what's happened is you can see suddenly all of them are in one swoop because of the Viking revival. So watch out what pop culture does. It makes them sound romantic, makes them sound exciting and interesting. And that does not diminish the value of the fun of looking at the hypothesis people put forward or enjoying the story and exploring them. That's okay. But look at the evidence. Don't let someone tell you a nice story, spin a good story that just makes it sound like something you want. So to be able to tell whether or not they are Norse or Native American or sometimes even European. Sometimes European inscriptions are so vague you can't tell were they done by natives or Europeans. So we need a way to document them and analyze them, and we've been doing that for a while. So there's a few techniques we've been using to do that. So I'm going to go back to Dighton Rock. So Dighton Rock, surprisingly, it's not as much documentation as you would think that's on this rock. And what we have, though, shows several different techniques. We have techniques where, to coax out the inscription more, they would go with chalk and they would draw on it with chalk to be able, where they saw lines, where they believed they saw lines, they would take the chalk and they draw it in and take pictures, which may seem very helpful, and it is to a certain extent. There's problems with that, though. Then here's what we call flashlight photography or shadow photography, where they would go at night and set up lights from extreme angles on the rock, and the shallow grooves would create shadows. So you take pictures, and that's helpful, but the problem is there's only, back then at least, so many photos you can take, the quality and so on. It's much better today, and there's actually better techniques that use that, but there's limitations on your return. Now, here's one that's interesting. They did an entire cast of Dighton Rock. And not only that, here's something a lot of people don't realize, is that cast was used to make replicas of it you can find in Portugal. Portugal is so excited about it because Edmund Delbar, psychologist, professor of psychology from Brown University, he said it was Miguel Corte-Real that wrote that on that rock. And Portugal was set afire with enthusiasm when they heard that. We were the first there, so they have a replica in mainland Portugal, and they have a replica in the Azores. Full-size replicas. They love that. As a matter of fact, Edmund Delbar is like a hero to them. But doing casts of it has its disadvantages and can be social inequality. And then finally you have what people do, well, that's not an illustration, that's actually a tracing, that's at Harvard. That's Harvard's tracing, they got a full-size trace of it. So you can trace it by putting paper over it. You can do rubbings, anyone familiar with gravestone rubbings, you can do rubbings on it. Some people would just sit there and do illustrations. They look at it and they go back, and matter of fact, Edmund Delbar did that with Dighton Rock. He visited it many times and did several drawings of it. So now all these techniques are helpful. but there's a problem with several of them. Number one, when I talked about chalk or tracing or rubbing, that is not something you really should do. I mean, if it's the only method you can use, I understand, but touching the rock, doing anything on the surface damages it because there's a lot of information that's there. Number one, if it's a shallow inscription and you go up to it and you believe that, oops, sorry about that, this line right here is a line, or maybe something over here is a line, it seems to you as that. It might be a natural feature that you think is a line, but it isn't. And every time someone goes and does it again and again, you're actually carving into it little by little. That rock, that surface of the rock that's been weathered is very fragile. And eventually you make it a real line. And now you've totally destroyed the inscription, you've changed it. Also, the other thing that can happen is when you're doing like rubbings and that, just the general damage on the surface can change. We can do judgment about possible age range based on the weathering that's on the rock. You can damage that also. And so touching in any way, putting pressure against a rock is not good. Even if you just touch it lightly. Matter of fact, when I go find caves, sometimes I know I'm at the cave that I've been looking for in the woods because I can look at the rock, you can see the wear on the rock that polished it from humans touching it. It's unbelievable how much it stands out. It looks like polished instead of being that rough look that we see on natural weathered rock. So and that's in short periods of time. Like the one Eldon's Cave, I can see markings from people touching that. And that's not as old as these Indian petroglyphs that we know of. Another thing that's an issue about using any of these sources, it's good to look at them to get an idea of what people thought, especially when it's illustrations or tracings and so on, but that's your assumption. You look at it, you see it in it. Just like if I say, look at the clouds, what do you see? I see a pig. Oh, I see a wolf. Everyone sees something different when it's very vague. So if you look at that and think that's the truth, you're wrong. That's what someone thought was the truth. So don't use that as your source. Go back to the original source. You can use it as a starting point, but go to the original source. The problem is a lot of people don't, and they use these and they start continuing going down the rabbit hole to dead ends that they shouldn't. So these are all different ways we've been using to examine these petroglyphs in New England. So what can we do to better look at the petroglyphs and inscriptions? Well, there's 5 different ways you can do it. 5 different methods you can use, not the only ones. So what you should do is, number one, find the history we know of already. We've done that with the Bourne rock. Many people have gone and traced the history back to the meeting house. We have enough evidence that I say we get a really strong case. Is it flawless? No, it's not, but it's strong enough, I think we can confidently say, yes, we can trace its history back to there. So if you look at what documentation, illustrations, pictures, writing, anything, when was it first publicly known, so on, that will tell us that that inscription, a petroglyph, has to be at least that old or older. So already we've now pushed the date back to a certain extent. Second thing we need to look at is, what is the technique? What way did they do the inscription? That tells you a lot. So I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm going to go over 3 techniques that typically you'll see in New England. Number one, you'll see what's called pecking, where they take a sharp rock, usually quartz, and they'll just peck away at the stone and make their marking on it. Now, you can tell by looking at rocks that have been carved like that, if they've been pecked, by the features of it. Pecking tends to give a dotted look to it, pitted, that are very uneven. The lines are not really straight. They tend to have different depths. They tend to be usually wide and shallow because the tip does not last on their tool. There's many other things. So it's easy to spot things that have been done with that method. Typically prehistoric Native Americans to a bit after colonial settlement. Next, we have using the same tool, but instead of pecking, they hold it and they take another rock and they hammer it. It's like a hammer and chisel method. That's better. A little deeper, a little cleaner, a little sharper, but still it's short dashes that vary in depth. There's some pitting. The lines are a little straighter, but not for long. So it's still kind of got a rough, irregular look to it. And the tip does wear down also quickly, so it varies of width and depth quickly. So you can tell by looking at it if they did it with that method. That usually is maybe late prehistoric Native American to past colonial settlements, and more likely Native Americans. The first one is more likely Native Americans, more to the older end. Is it absolutely positive in both of them to be Native American? No. Colonists did those techniques sometimes, but it's a probability thing. And then the last is iron tools. Hammer, chisel, chipping in there, deep, sharp, well-defined, clean designs. European, colonial settlement, or early colonial vegetation. So we can say confidently, probably that's who did it, but over time, Native Americans got access to the tools, they started using it, they sharpened their skills at doing that, so eventually they got better at using them. So we need another way to differentiate. So we got two things: dig up the history, what's the technique or method used in tools, what is the symbols, what is the language used. Native Americans, they did standard, I'm going to tell you a couple, like hands, they love doing hands. Feet, bare feet, they love doing bare feet. Faces that look like faces kids did. It's like a big oval shape with dots for the eyes, and a little slash for the mouth. Birds, elk, fish, the serpent we saw. Boats, they actually started doing boats. They did colonial boats when the settlers first, or I should say the Europeans first started fishing off of here. So you can find on the shorelines boats they did in a distinct style. That's the other thing, is style's important. This is like art history. Anyone here take art history in school? So you learn just by looking at not only so they draw a boat, well, how did they do the boat? It's different than how the Europeans did their boats and how the Europeans did their birds and their fish. So style tells you a lot. And if we look at European, what do we have for European? Well, what symbols? Well, symbols, letters, numbers. Letters and numbers assembled into words and dates. Also, they did, like I said, birds too. They did eagles, but very elaborate eagles in styles we see back in Europe. They did shields and scrolls and fish in styles we see coming from Europe. So we can, just from style and symbols, tell who probably did it. Sometimes we're lucky with European. They do put names and dates on it, so it makes it really easy. So we got three different ways. So we added, the symbols that they use. Next, location. Location is very telling. That can tell a lot about the history and can reveal about meaning. Meaning's always the hardest one to figure out, so I'm not going to delve into that because that's a tough subject. But location can tell you a lot. So was the location close to where there was a Native American village? Was it near where Native Americans got access to certain resources they needed, near a Native American trail, near a Native American spiritual location, so on, something that had meaning to them? More likely Native American. Same thing with colonial or European. Is it near something we've established archaeologically is a location where settlers came? Better chance with that. Sometimes you can also go by the artifacts surrounding it. So you find a petroglyph out in the middle of the woods near a cave. Could be colonial, could be Indian. Which one is it? Let's do a test dig on finding Indian arrow tips and so on, antlers. I can carbon date those things. I can see that they're old enough that most likely they're Native American. So location and things you find around the proximity to other things tells you a lot about the history. Now the last piece of evidence we use is the rock itself. Now we can't carbon date the rock. There is ways to kind of carbonate some rocks, sort of. But that doesn't tell us anything. When the rock was created, doesn't mean anything to us. It's meaningless. The rock could be millions of years old. It doesn't tell us when the carving got there. So what we need to do is somehow tell how old the inscription is. And we can do that because when you do an inscription in stone, what you're doing is you're removing the patination, the weathering that's on the rock till you get down to fresh rock so it stands out. So you see gray and then suddenly you see like bright pinks in that. And a lot of times Native American ones don't go deep. They just want to get down to that level. But how long it takes for that inscription to get weathered again equal to the rock that's unaffected takes time. This is where it gets tough though. Every rock is different. Granite is not granite because some granite has certain minerals and certain chemicals and so on. Like for example, some granite has iron sulfates, pyrite. Pyrite exposed to water and air gives you rust and also creates sulfuric acid. You ever see the rock? You can just take your hand and it crumbles. If it's red, probably has iron pyrite in it. You got sulfuric acid breaking down the rock. So even granite can be easily weathered. So that's hard to judge the age, but that can help us tell the age of the inscription. Even better, if we can find lichen on the rock, we can carbon date the lichen, and we can tell age based on that. So at least, that doesn't tell us how old the inscription is, but if we carbon date lichen and it says it's 100 years old, then we know that inscription is at least that or older. So we have all these techniques to evaluate to get to the truth, and we need to keep doing this over and over. When we get one answer, it doesn't mean we're finished. We got to reanalyze again and again. So now comes the interesting part. What do we have today to help us see it better? Well, we have some really fun things, and this is the things I was telling you are free. There's 3 things I use, technically one of them 90% of the time, the other 2 not so useful because they're not as advantageous, but 3 things I use to be able to reveal and coax out inscriptions. And one of them literally does make the invisible visible again. You'll be impressed by how well it does it. So the first one is photogrammetry. Anyone here familiar with photogrammetry? Photogrammetry was created by the military long ago when they did aerial photographs and they had to stitch together all the photos. Where in a curved world, they had to use math to be able to figure out how to plug them together. That technology today has gone way further than that. What we now do is we take a series of photographs. Some of you may see me taking photographs. I'm doing a second run for the rock here. So you take a series of photographs of a rock from all different sides, from all different angles, and then you take it back and put it in software. The software then looks at your photographs, taking into account for what lens you used. It can figure out where the camera was, what the angle of the camera was, what the distance of the camera was from each photograph, and eventually draws a model of every position the camera was in reference to the object. Then from that, it can then figure out the shape of the object. And then once it gets the shape of the object, it can wrap your pictures around it. And now suddenly you have there in your hand a 3D model that's virtually the same as the object that you can hold up and look at and zoom in on and cast lights on it and strip off the texture and look at it in ways that no one's ever been able to see before. And it's mind-blowing how much information you can extract from looking at it like that. It is unbelievable technology, and this is a key way I am documenting most of the petroglyphs and inscriptions I find. It's the best record we can find because as they're lost, it still gives a person the opportunity to virtually be there with the rock and see it as best as possible, rather than just being there, because once it's gone, we can't do that anymore. Next is polynomial texture mapping, really long, we call it PTM. It's kind of like the photogrammetry. The difference is you take the object back with you to your lab, you set it up, put a camera facing it, they're still, turn off the lights, and you take pictures with the light source being moved around instead of the camera. It makes a 3D model, and then when you're viewing it, you can move this little dot around here and it changes where the light is. This is actually the object you're looking at. If you're barely in the real picture, you can see this inscription on there, but you can zoom in on it and create great shadows against it, and suddenly everything appears. That's like the shadow or flashlight photography. Really great tool, but you got to be able to bring it back to your lab. And the one thing I do not do is if I find something, I cannot bring it back. I report it. If it's a portable object, I report it to archaeologists, because if you move it, you lose information. I leave it to them to gather the information. Trust me, there's many times I see things, I'm like, oh, that would be nice on my shelf. If I could put it up there and look pretty, that's like a prize, but I can't. It would tear my heart out. So, and I leave it to them, but it builds a relationship so that then they know I'm someone that they can depend on, so they share with me too. So there is a payback for being, respecting that value of it. So, but that one, like I said, I don't really have much of a use for. This last one, I have very little use for. It has to do with the one thing that I rarely see, and I haven't talked about yet, pictographs. Everyone know here what pictographs are? It's when you do paintings on rocks. We don't have pictographs here, really. There are some, they mostly probably have disappeared. There are a few that may have something left. I may be able to coax out. I haven't gotten to them yet because they're not easy to access. But in the Midwest, they have lots of because it's dry there. So pictographs last for a long time. This tool is used there all the time. Mathematician created it. This comes from the military too. It's when they did photography so they could see objects that were there in the middle of forests. They could coax out buildings and things. What you're doing is you're taking photographs and you're looking at all the spectrums within that photograph and analyzing each of them. So we're looking at this. There's a lot of layers of different spectrums that were reflected. We just don't see them with the human eye. Matter of fact, there's filters even on the camera that cuts out spectrums that would be captured. So you can use a better camera to even gather more information if you get the filters removed from them. But what it does is it goes through that, and then it looks at the differences in colors in the spectrums, so subtle that we can't see them mathematically. You can see it, like the difference of 5 points in color may not be able to be seen by us, but that software does. When it sees it, it stretches out the difference. And it goes and flips through all the spectrums for you, and you just sit and watch. So now check this out. This is a rock in Swansea, Massachusetts. It's outside of a cave. It's on Abrams Rock. You might know about it. It was claimed to be used by a Native American or a Native American family. So I check every cave I go to like that with this tool, hoping maybe I'll be surprised by some pictograph. Well, I didn't find an ancient pictograph, but I did find something. So when I subjected it to the software, this is what appeared. The word cave. So let me go back. So this is without it. So I process it, and one spectrum, boom, word cave suddenly appears. So here, I can do a quick analysis, and I'm sure we all know what it probably was, but what I would typically do is then I go look at, what do I see? What's the characters? Characters is English letters. What's the technique and style? Style looks very much like I see with graffiti, probably spray paints. So spray paint, I can date spray paint to 1940s at best, somewhere in there. I probably would push this more towards maybe 50s, 60s. So I'd say probably done earliest in the 60s. Then, now I have to test that. And how can I test that? I can scrape the rock and have the chemistry of that paint that I can't see be checked. And I can tell how old that paint is based on that chemistry, and then verify my hypothesis. So this would be an example, but you can do this with petroglyphs. In the Midwest, they've coaxed pictures out of a rock that looks like it has nothing there, and suddenly you see what looks like monsters and dragons and people and so on. It's an unbelievable technology. Now again, all this technology is free or virtually free. Well, actually, you can get them all in a free version, but honestly, the one that I say virtually free, photogrammetry, I would say it's worth $100. So you pay for the better tool. It's so much better if you pay that a little bit, but you can get a free tool. So now let's take a look. Finally, it comes full circle to the Bourne rock. Hooray! So we're going to take a closer look at the Bourne rock using my favorite tool, photogrammetry. And before we do that, so let's just quickly talk. So everyone knows here, 1680, we talked about that. It was used as a stepping stone at the Christian Indian meeting house. Then it went to the doorway of a Jackson and Parker. We can actually establish the home was nearby, so it's not a stretch to think it was moved from there. And then eventually it was given to a Miss Fisher and then sold to, who is it? Now I always have to look at his name, Percival. Oh, that name, I don't know why it escapes me. Percival Lombard in the 30s. It was sold, well, there's some debate. Was it sold? Was it given? But either way, we can trace it to that. It was in his possession and came here. People researching the inscription didn't happen until after it got here, though, which is unfortunate. I wish we could find documentation of people having given some insight on it before that. That may be very telling. But once it got here, then we got different ideas. And I'm not going to go too deep into each of these, but Professor Edmund Delbar, I talked about him a little while ago, Brown University, thought it was Indian symbols and coaxed out some meaning. I'm not sure. I've tried to figure out his method. I'm not sure how he got that, but I'm not going to argue whether it's right or wrong. It's a kind of really complex. I don't know how he really drew that out. But Olaf Strandwald, he was a superintendent of schools in Washington State. And he just loved the Norse history and went around all different places and kept, saying, Norse, Norse, Norse. Could he be right? Absolutely. He coaxed out this, this from the inscription. Barry Fell, local professional scholar from Harvard University. He was a zoologist. He thought it was Iberian. And again, I have a little trouble understanding how he kind of coaxed that out of the inscription. But maybe if I spent a little more time, I may better understand how he saw that. And then finally, Edward Lennox. He is still alive today. He's an archaeologist. His expertise is Native American culture, Native American history. He specializes in petroglyphs and also has done many books and many papers on it, specifically about the Northwest and New England, Northeast and New England, and also has done books on European inscription in New England. So really, like, this guy knows his information. He says it's Indian pictographs, though I question why he said pictographs. It should have been petroglyphs, because pictographs is painting. But now we could say, because he's the one that specializes in this, he's the guy who's right. Well, don't always think that. Just because someone's a scholar, just because someone specializes in something, doesn't mean they're correct. We should always look at the evidence and then look at the object and take a look yourself, objectively analyze it and compare, test that evidence, because he can be wrong. So yes, I probably would be more confident with him than a zoologist or a superintendent or a professor of psychology, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. That does not, so authority does not mean you're right. So we need to look at it ourselves. So here, there's not a lot of different, pictures and illustrations of the Bourne stone. So I just collected probably the best of. A lot of them are pretty much exactly the same. So we can look at these and see what other people coaxed out of it. And the one thing that I noticed when looking at this that really caught my eye is that they look a little all too much alike. There's too much, there's a little too exact in some of these. So I worry that what happened, since it's such a hard thing to see, that one person did an illustration, then everyone looked at that, then looked at the rock. So if I say, hey, do you see that in the cloud? And you say, what? And I say, elephant. So you start seeing the elephant too. And you can't not see the elephant. So that's something you got to be careful for. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact dates on all these things. So eventually what I'd like to do, and I'm actually working on a report for this, I'll probably try to get a date to put a timeline on these. Because if this was the first thing done, someone puts coloring in it, that may be the culprit that caused that. Because this, they might thought of, hey, I'm doing everyone a favor, I'm making it visible. But no, then they didn't. Because now you can't not see what they think they see. And that's not good news, because if you try to see what's really there, and I'm telling you this is definitely not what's there, you will have a hard time. And we can't try to remove it because we might damage the stone. But we do have techniques to take care of that. So I want to show you why I know these are all wrong. You probably have seen what someone already did in the 70s. Check this out. They did a rubbing. I'm not a fan of it. But suddenly, look at this. Suddenly, we got shoes. We got a upside down boat or something. These lines are very different. We got a hand in there. Things stand out. This is the most accurate illustration I've seen of the rock so far. Rubbings are, in the archaeological community right now, they still believe, even though they don't like you touching the rock, they still believe this is one of the best techniques for coaxing out the petroglyphs. Until now. So before I show you something, we're going to take this is a picture I took a month ago. So I can look, I can do really, this is even the highest res I can do. I can even do better than this. And I can sit there and look at it and try not to see that. I took all different pictures and I could examine this, but it's hard to see. Even when you're looking at it, it's hard to see anything that's there. One of the problems is we have a lot of noise, what I call white noise there. We got the coloring of the rock, the shadows in the rock. There's also pinks that are in the rock. They're just like busy. It distracts. We don't need to see that. That's a problem. We got to get rid of that. We got to be able to see just the inscription. So with that said, here, check this out. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to change my view. And I'm going to bring this over to your side because I want to be able to control it from this side. Let me see if I can get it over there. So I just got to change my thing to replicate my display. All right, so now, okay, this Bourne stone. Okay, it looks like a nice picture of the Bourne stone. So, but, check this out. Now I can look at the rock like no one else has ever been able to see it. I can zoom in on it. I can see right up to the surface. I can look at it from all different angles. I can zoom in to down to each groove and coaxing it. I can move it up and down. I can zoom in and out. I can rotate it any way I want. Sometimes, and one of the beginning advantages is that everyone's looking at it this way. Trust me, sometimes just flipping it around and looking at it that way will make you see it completely different. So I can do all this stuff, but still we have the problem of all the white noise. Before we start examining this, we got to get rid of that. And also we have the problem with the shadows that were on the rock when I took the picture. We don't want to see that. We don't want only shadows we want is shadows coming from light I cast on it live. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click over here. These are what we call our model inspectors. So now, and let me tilt it again so you can see it, most of it, and zoom in out a little bit. So now what I can do is come to my model inspectors. My favorite one to do is matte cap. So with a click of the finger, boom, all my textures are gone. And now I can tilt it, and now I can zoom in, and all I'm seeing is the surface of the rock. So now I can see those lines. Look at that. It looks like an H and maybe an N, backwards N, I should say, and then it looks like it could be an M. But look, now that all the clutter is there, I can zoom into that thing. It looks like an M, and if I tilt it just right, I can see that really that M doesn't have a complete connection. This is questionable here. Was it supposed to connect? Maybe not. Is it because it's weathered? Maybe it is. That's something I could keep examining. So I can look at this and then start getting a much better look. There are certain things you'll find when you look at this now and then look at the pictures, you'll find that certain things in those pictures are wrong. Definitely not in the rock. They're probably just the colorings or just natural features that they're assuming are part of the inscription. So let's go through some things. So we already went through the written history. So we established to I've already forgotten what date it was, 1680. Let's go next thing. Let's look at technique. How was this carved in there? So let's zoom in on like one of the deeper carvings, the letters. Well, right away I could see something here. Oops, let me get back up. And you'll notice, and if you look at it in different areas, look, deep, 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 deep. That looks pecked. Most likely it was pecked in there. Maybe it was. It could have been different. We can keep looking at all the different things. I'll just give you, I haven't done a full deep analysis, but generally looking at that, a lot of that looks like it was a pecked in design. So number one, right now it's leaning towards Native American, probably prehistoric, but there are some that were done by colonists or Europeans, like the smallpox cave one I put up, he pecked that in there. So has not ruled it out. Let's look, symbols will be the next thing. Well, the one thing we've seen is that we have symbols that do look like letters. Problem I have with that right now, it doesn't necessarily eliminate the idea of them being letters, is that I'm looking at them and they don't really seem to make a whole lot of sense. I see an H and then the backwards N and a questionable whether that's an M or a right N with an I, and it doesn't really form a word. You can try to attach it to other languages, but it's kind of shaky. I can't really nail it down, but it does look like some kind of lettering. So we'll say that maybe it is. So let's move on. What else do we have here? So if I move it around, let me see. See if I can coax this out for you to see up there. I can see, I'm not sure if this is good enough for you guys, but let me see. Let me zoom in a little maybe. Pull it back here. The hand. So there's the thumb and the palm and the fingers, definite Indian style, I should say Native American style petroglyph. I've seen petroglyphs like that are outlines, hand. Also, I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, I might have hand being symbolized of getting energy from the stone during the vision quests. The sachems would do that. So this may have had a cultural or spiritual significance to them. So yeah, I have no doubt that definitely is. Does it mean that all the inscriptions are Native American? Not necessarily. We could have Native American and someone else put it on there. We can have mixed. I've seen that. So let's look at other symbols. So let me go out and move it over. So then we got that object they saw. There's the boat objects. So boat could be European, could be Native American. So how do we tell the difference? Well, is that boat, you see here, is that in the style that Europeans did their boats, or is it the style we see Native Americans? Well, it's more likely Native Americans. Still could be European, but leaning over more to the style they did during early visitation and colonization by the Europeans. So I lean more in that direction right now, just in style, and also I can see the pecking technique again. Then if we move down, we can see that whoever did the rubbing was spot on with what they discovered, because look at the shoes. You can see them clearly carved in there, pecked in designs of shoes. So who did the shoes? The shoes, again, could be Native American, could be colonist, definitely a Native American style for doing the inscription, but Native Americans did have a fascination with doing the feet. I'm not sure what the meaning, I haven't researched the meaning of the foot designs. This could be a reflection of early visitation. They see, or during trade, they see not their footprints, they see the colonists or the European footprints, and they're representing them that way. So there's a strong possibility that doesn't seem like a stretch. And we could go around. There are other symbols that seem kind of vague. Actually, I saw one, and I'm not convinced yet, but I will give some examination to, if I look over here, let's see if I can find it again. Here we go. You might be able to see it. So a line here, and then these intersecting, and that pit there, and that, and going there. That is not very far from how Native Americans did pictures of people. They often did them in very simple stick designs just like that. Now, maybe I'm seeing something myself that's not really there. That's why I say this is questionable right now, but could be. One thing I did notice, though, well, actually, I'll get back to that after. So let's get back to the inscription of the letters. And okay, we're still good on time. So letters, let me go over here again. So I'm looking at these letters. A lot of them they thought were more complex or more like just lines there that you can see. So there's not much to them. These, again, they don't seem to make sense. So I did a little digging. And one thing you can do to be able to tell, if you can't make sense of it, you can look at what we do have documented we know are Native American, what we do have documented, like if you want to examine Norse lettering or Iberian or Phoenician and so on, where does it match up with whatever your hypothesis is? When I was looking at Native American, though, Native American was the one I found that matched the best, because when there was early colonial visitation or settling, Native Americans started to try to imitate. And they started to mimic what they saw the Europeans doing. And you start to see graffiti that looks like writing. Then eventually sachems started having to sign things when they gave over property. And you'll actually see signatures that look a lot like this. Sometimes some Native Americans did just simple signatures of arrows and that, but others tried to imitate. They didn't understand. They thought it was just symbols, so they did symbols. So I've seen things that look very much like that were Native American signatures or just doodling. So right now, my guess would be this is most likely Native American, the Native Americans that lived at Herring Ponds, a village that was over there. And who were they? I'm sorry, I was just informed. Was it? Wampanoags, thank you. I should know this. Wampanoags. So then most likely it was something that was by them. Now, I'm going to go out and give you a little bit of a stretch of a hypothesis. And again, I think I'm pretty confident about that. I would need to examine it again and again. So this is not an end analysis by me. This is just my first guess. But this is kind of a out there stretch that I notice is the hand is incredibly light compared to other stuff on here. Other stuff on here is much darker. The hand is light. The boats in the shoes are a little lighter. The boat is deeper and the letters are deeper. I question whether or not the hand was done much earlier. And that may be the oldest. That could definitely be prehistoric Native American. Then we see an unfolding in history, added illustrations. The Europeans come here. They see the footprints. They see the boats' feet. Illustrations on petroglyphs are not uncommon for them to do, so they do that with the colonial shoe prints. The boats, typical of them to do, so they do that. And then signature. So you see a history unraveling here of the early presence of Native Americans and then the migration of Europeans in. And this could be a signing over of something they considered sacred land or property. So actually the Edmund Lennox was the one who said he thought it was a signature. I don't think that's a stretch. Now, do I have a lot of evidence to support that? The most evidence I have is just the depth of the inscription. And I don't think it's that much of a stretch to at least say this is probably older than the others and could be prehistoric just because of the weathering. But I kind of just, it's just a hypothesis at the moment of the idea of the history that it says. But with that said, I think this makes it a very valuable artifact because there is a bit of history that's there that goes back far enough into prehistoric time to more modern, use our petroglyphs on the stone by the local Native Americans. One actually archaeologist did even kind of go in the same direction as me. He said that he thought it was a rock that had spiritual value. And that would make sense if there was a hand on it and the sachem was using that to absorb energy from the ground. But not all, just again, I want to back up. Handprints aren't always meaning that. That's one of the possible answers of what that could mean. So there are other meanings to it. But so he interpreted it as, yes, that was spiritual. This was a totem, a spiritual totem to them. When the colonists came here and they did the Christian conversion, they symbolically took the stone, turned it upside down, and used it as a stepping stone into the meeting house, which is a higher level of spirituality. That's not a big stretch, because if you look at the evidence of the history we know around it, if you look at the tradition of the symbols and so on, and that was not uncommon for people coming in trying to get people over, is instead of getting rid of your traditions, we absorb your traditions. So that's not a big stretch. Again, this is just still a hypothesis that needs more support, and that's why we need to continue to document and investigate these things. With that said, I look at that, perfect timing, I think. So I've about come on the end. I'm not sure if there's anything else I want to point out. I could go on. I forgot to point out, you can look at it upside down and see it as a relief too. So look at it, you can see the hand even better as a relief. So, but this tool right here is going to make change way we look at things like petroglyphs. The better we can get at using this tool, because our technology is getting better and better at doing this, so it's going to become more and more accurate to the point that everyone can look at it and do a pretty good analysis. In the end, though, after I finish my analysis, I'm going to come back to the rock and look at it myself, because there's no better source than the actual object. You need to objectively look at the object itself. And the other thing I want to mention is that not only is it available for me to look at, but all the things I do are available online. And that's one of the great things about this. If you got a computer, you can go online, and if I clicked on the right button, there we go. Look at that. There's more petroglyphs I've done and inscriptions. And then sometimes I do tests on cameras. That's a new camera for my underwater ROV. Here's some I did in England. Here's one I did recently in Ware. This is an inscription from the 1800s. So I basically put everything online. Anytime you want to go examine them, they're available for you. Go take a look, examine them. That's my goal, is in the end I want to make a catalog of all the ones I collect, and a much better tool than this available for everyone, for scholars, for general public, to go in, to see it, to examine it, and all the evidence outside of this that I've collected, and come up with your own conclusions. Because sometimes when we have a community mind looking at these things that in some ways are still a mystery for us, like the In Hoc Signo Vinci stone, all it takes is just one person who kind of looks at it from a different perspective. And somebody say, well, what about that? And then everyone's like, oh my God, I never noticed that before. And we have an answer. So it doesn't take being a scholar to make great discoveries. It just takes access to the right technology and the information. And with that said, we have a lot of access to, other than what I'm making available, to scholarly papers, to scientists, to scholars, to technology, to information, geologic information, historical information. It's all available at our fingertips for free now through the internet, through colleges and so on. And we should take advantage of it and then, dig up. There's not enough archaeologists to do this work, not enough geologists to do this work. So this is our opportunity to step up and become part of the, adventure to discover something fantastic. So actually with that, look at that, 2 minutes over now. So with that, I'm gonna kind of stop there. I'll tell you about my websites. Actually, let me just quickly show that, then we'll do questions. So if you are interested in the things that I do, I'm gonna open up my PowerPoint. Oops, there we go. So, hello, there we go. So that's the one key thing I want you to remember, is that the Bourne stone, I think, is an incredibly valuable artifact. I think really we should, respect it as that and celebrate it, because this is telling a lot about going back to the earliest colonization of, the area of Bourne, of New England. this is, I think, a monumental piece of Indian history or Native American history and incredible artifacts. But if you are interested, my expedition on National Geographic Open Explorer is called Stories in Stone, Mysterious Petroglyphs and Inscriptions. I talk about all the different technology I'm doing. I'm exploring other technologies. I've barely shown you all of it. There's a lot other pieces out there I'm using that are fantastic. You can see as I explore them, I post about them. I do videos. My models are up there too, so you can get right to them. I have the Bourne stone up there right now, so you can go see it there. I have a couple other expeditions available. I'll show you those in a moment. You can go to my website, New England Explorers. Also, I have another one called Strange New England. Don't let the name make you think it's ghosts. To me, it meant strange history. I do some folklore on that one, but I do it from a historic perspective. I also am doing an expedition with my friend exploring colonial mines all over New England. We go find them, dig them up, explore them. We're sending ROVs into them. Amazing stuff. He's doing documentaries on them. The amazing documentaries. There's us with a ROV in a mine where they mine the ore for chains they used to block the Hudson River from the British coming in. And there's actually my ROV. We found this artifact in the water. We still don't know what it is. And then I also am doing one on bioluminescence in New England. There's 8 creatures, plants and animals that are bioluminescent, that back in colonial times were frightening to see at night. They thought they were weird things, creatures and that. So it's fun stuff to go explore, interesting animals and plants to learn about. That one is probably not necessarily as on the front of the oven right now for me, but fun things to check out. So, and there's some, that's a fungus that's bioluminescent, that's from New England. So with that said, let's open up to questions. What questions do we have? Yes?
Have you ever shot with, what is that, the red, infrared?
No, I haven't done infrared photography yet. That's something I'd like to
Because
try.
you would get a black and you would get a lot of definition with infrared.
Yeah, I've wanted to try that. I actually been wanting to get a jump camera, and I want to actually get rid of that. There's filters they put in, strip the filters away, and then use special infrared filters to then be able to only see that light. And if I do that, because the filters they have there is to remove a lot of things that we would capture on the digital cameras now.
There's another way to do it, and
Yeah.
I read about it. I was in the camera room, and I read about it, and I'm trying to remember back how they did it, but it's not that hard to do.
Yeah, I've seen the techniques. Some people have placed up there the step-by-step of how to do the infrared photography.
Right.
I think that's very useful because, again, just like we're doing the multispectral stuff, it reveals something that normally we don't see with the
And
naked
also
eye.
heat photography.
That I haven't done yet. That I definitely want to get for when we hunt for caves. We do what's called looking for blowholes, and they blow hot air during the winter. But sometimes you can't see them if there's no snow on the ground. But with infrared, we could see all of them. Yes.
Where is the Bourne stone? Well, how could we see it? Oh, right here? Yeah.
Right back there. The Bourne stone is right there. You can see it up close. It's an incredible artifact. That's why it's like I'm excited. Yes.
Have you ever talked to any of the local Wampanoag about that stone?
No, I would like to talk to them. That's something I need to hear what they believe the history is, because that's just like I said, with our European, we not only have documented, we can talk about the history that's been shared through generations. That puts as much value on them, because what has been shared about that stone for their culture, and that could be very telling. I think and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something we often forget, is to go back to the possible beginning source. And sometimes we assume they don't know about it, but you'd be surprised. Yes?
You said at one point it was used as a stepping stone.
Yes, stepping stone for the meeting house.
Was it posed with the carvings facing up and visible, or facing down?
They said it was facing down. The record says it was facing down. That's why I wish they documented it better, because I worry that if it ever was facing up, we get a lot of wear and tear. We lost a lot from that, so that would change our understanding of how much we can date it by that. But right now the record says facing down, so I think we have enough to confirm what we know about the
And if it was
stone.
facing down, was it facing down because it made a steadier stone to step on, or because maybe they thought poorly of the carvings and they wanted to use the stone, but they didn't want to show off the carvings?
Yeah, that I'm not sure. There could be a lot of reasons why. Like, it could be faced down also for the fact they don't want to see the representation of the spiritual symbols by the Indians, saying we are retiring those symbols, but not necessarily to show them that they may have thought negatively of them, but just like the many great people come in and take over a land, they don't want to show disrespect. They say we'll absorb it, but they kind of hide it. You know, they kind of sweep under the rug. So that may be possible, but that's a lot. We have nothing to base it on, unfortunately. But it's interesting to discuss. This is where great discussions can happen of different and kind of flesh out ideas of what could have happened. So yes.
When you said there's two different things that the hand could mean, one was spiritual and the other was...
Oh, there's many. I don't know all of them. I know the spiritual one. I'm still Indian petroglyphs of symbolism. I'm still exploring New England. Sorry, do you have? Let me finish.
And then you mentioned also there was someone that said it could possibly be a deed.
Oh no, the deed or it could be the.
That was the handprint of like his signature.
His signature. The hand may not connect. I've never known of a hand to be part of a signing over a property, but signatures, yes. That I've seen on rocks before, where signatures saying this was given to, or representing we're signing this land over.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but the hand I would still trace back to either spiritual or, like I said, there are other meanings for it that go across America. Some of them have been carried from the Midwest to here, but to understand, I'm not an expert on what the symbols mean. I need to learn more about that. I probably will reach out to local archaeologists to get a better understanding, to wrap my mind around that, to better analyze them.
Also, when you say prehistoric, what period do you mean? Do you mean archaic? Where?
Prehistoric means before any kind of recorded history. So I consider late prehistoric means just before when the colonists got here. So prehistoric can go from before that to like the first time, Native Americans were here. But I don't know, there probably is an exact date range. I can't really say definitively what the archaeology community considers the appropriate date range for us.
Like in Massachusetts and through the Narragansett, Rhode Island area, basically they think it's about 6,000 to 8,000 years old.
Yep.
They're finding in Quincy and then basically tracing it through that Narragansett area.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering,
That's why
has
I
anybody done any, research on, exactly when those carvings, only being 500 years or 600 years or 1,000 years is nothing compared to like 8,000 years.
Yeah, that's a really big problem, because that's why I said prehistoric, late prehistoric. So I kind of lean more towards the end, because we have a problem with petroglyphs lasting here, because with the weather, it's horrible. We have cold, rock freezes on the outside but doesn't on the inside. So it shrinks and then the inside doesn't. Then sometime it expands and then the inside doesn't. So the surface breaks off easily, granites and other softer stones easily. So anything that goes back to thousands of years, if it was not in a cave, I don't think it's going to last. So we're talking probably not that old. Maybe something could last 1,000 years. That's where it gets complicated, because the chemistry and geology is not an exact science of how long a rock can last. So I'd stick it towards more prehistoric late, meaning just before the colonists got here. So, but it could be older. Like I said, that's something it's going to take a long time before we can really nail down. And even at that, you lose. The older it gets, the harder it is to date how old it is. So yes.
How do you hear, you were talking about these caves that are lost or forgot. How do you hear about a cave? How do you know where to go?
That's fun. Sometimes I hear about caves. That's the same way I hear about petroglyphs sometimes. Sometimes you're reading about one thing and then suddenly you see some in a diary or in our historic record from a town. You just like see this little thing like, oh, went by so-and-so, so-and-so's cave. And you're like, what? And then you're like, that's the only reference you have. Or you, like I said, see it in people's diaries. Or, let me think, court records. I did one by court records. There was counterfeiters in Rhode Island, and there was a legend of a counterfeiter's cave in northwestern Rhode Island. And the town it was in, at that point, believed it was just folklore. No one can find it. No one ever found it. It's about this special cave, so well hidden, no one but the people involved in the counterfeiting could ever know where it was. And near that cave was a rock they built at. They did their counterfeiting there. Well, I did a little digging, and eventually I found there's a historical record of it. It existed. So I went and tried to find it, and eventually I did. And check this out. I actually had it in my pictures beforehand. Let me see if I can see where it is. Oh, here it is. Check this out. And this is why it was never found. Here's where the cave is. Look at this. Where's the cave? You can't see the cave. Well, one of the things they said is the cave was covered by a rock slab, and that's what the lore said. A rock slab that could cover it. Triangular opening, gave exact measurements. Lo and behold, ta-da! There I am going inside. And I measured it, and you can't see it here, but all around there's all rocks placed by human hands to make it sit in there nicely. And there's inside the cave. So sometimes all it takes is it's just in someone's diary that got the town afire about finding it. No one could find it. Do a little research. The research gave me the clues, and then I went out and found the cave that was lore. Now it's real. So, but that's how you find caves. That's how you find petroglyphs. Sometimes you just hear about them in some little whisper and a passing word in one entry. I found some of the most incredible things while reading one other thing. I'm like, what? Hold on, I got to write that down and look that up later. And suddenly I'm researching like 3 different things.
So did you cover that back up?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I covered it back up. And I told the town, I gave them GPS coordinates. We're trying to get in what do they call it? An easement. It's called, not a culture, what?
Conservation easement.
Bingo, thank you. Yep, thank you. You win the prize. You're in another cookie. Conservation easements with the landowner, which give them tax breaks and that, but they can still say no one can go on the land. If they have the right, but it will be protected. So, but this is a landowner who likes a lot of privacy and is kind of touchy. I'm letting the town handle that. But yeah, so I reported it, I covered it to protect it. I'll leave it in their hands. So, and someone asked me, have you ever found any counterfeit coins? Would you keep them? Oh, I would love, you know how valuable counterfeit coins are? More valuable than real coins. Because counterfeit coins were destroyed, so there's not many left. Another coin, actually, just sideline, Higley coppers. Look them up if you get a chance. Guy made his own copper coins in Connecticut out of his copper mine and used them to buy beer. There's not many of them around. Eventually, the pub owner said, what are you doing? I said, well, okay, it's not worth what I said. Whatever you think it's worth, because copper is of value. But those Higley coppers, oh, they're very valuable now. But that's great. He makes his own coin to buy beer. That's the best story. But yeah, so that's how you sometimes people tell you about lore they hear and so on. So it's all about just a little piece of information. Just start digging, and suddenly, one day you can dig into a story that you do for years, and suddenly you hit the right source, and all opens up to you. Yes.
Yeah, speaking of lore, you mentioned the Timothy Otis Payne.
Yes, yeah,
I'm not from up that way.
Yes.
I used to go fishing right near the Solace.
Yes, there's a beauty. I love those stones. And they did some building right near the other one, the Minister Rock.
Right.
Makes me uncomfortable, but
wondering why do you think that there might be more?
because I actually read some literature in early gazetteers, even familiar gazetteers, that mentioned about there being several stones. I think they mentioned there probably about 3 or 4 stones out there. So I don't know if it's just talk. See, that's where I'm like, would he have done them? Possibly. A lot of times these things are out in the middle of the woods. People just did them because that's what was important to them, and they didn't tell anyone about them. And we stumble on them all the time. So I give them, and it wouldn't be surprising. I mean, you see the work he did? That's incredible carving. Going out in the middle of the woods. I mean, how could you have that much time? But they do it. And it's, so I think we'll ever find any? I don't know. I question. But I like to believe we will, because that would be the greatest find, to find more works by him. I mean, he's a brilliant man. It's sort of funny. He wanted to be a minister in Bridgewater, and you look at his history, he was a very smart man, very talented, but he just wanted to be a minister. It's just so funny. So, yes.
As a person who has gone into caves, dark holes, small places, Batman squeeze, how do you overcome the anxiety of going into a tight place that you might get stuck and not be able to get yourself out?
I admit that it was a little scary in the beginning. So let me just to kind of help with that. So the first real cave I went to in New England was Eldon French. And I'll put that picture up. So here's several pictures of it. So when we found it, the beginning of it went from stand-up height to lower and lower and lower. Matter of fact, I think I have one picture. That doesn't even show how low it is, that my friend Hochella is in. And it was kind of uncomfortable going in. But being guys, I turn to him and I say, "You want to keep going?" And he goes, "I don't know. You want to keep going?" And I'm like, "Sure, I want to keep going." And really deep inside, I was like, "I'm scared." I was really scared. But we just keep pushing because neither of us want to be the one to say, "Let's not go any further." Oh, here's like the one that looks tight, but that's not Eldon.
So was there a way out on the other end, or did you have to turn around, crawl backwards, or what?
No, you get to turn around. At the end, it gets really big.
Oh.
It gets really big. Look at porcupines we find in caves. So at the end, it gets incredibly big, really stand-up height. See, that's the entrance to the cave right there. Here's actually in the cave. Let's see.
Where is this?
That's in Stockbridge.
Oh, this is the Stockbridge one.
Yeah, it's the Stockbridge one. So the thing that got me over it is that even though it gets really tight, and I'm going to try to find it as I talk. Even though it gets really tight, we kept pushing on until we got to the end, and we started to see like where it really opened up, and that's like a tight. We're digging that cave out, and it became this beautiful like hall that was like 100 foot high, or maybe not, maybe 50 to 100 feet high. It's hard to estimate right now off the top of my head. This is one of the smallpox things in Connecticut. That's a deed to God in Massachusetts. Let me see, where is it? And when you get to the end and you see the beauty and how incredible, and you're realizing like, oh my God, I'm seeing something. There it is. That's not necessarily even the lowest. It got lower than that. We had to crawl in, and there's rock that hurts. Your knees get ripped up. But when we got to that end where it opened up, and we saw beautiful marble with spirals of blacks and grays and bluish grays and so on, awe-inspiring. That's the moment I said, oh my God, you know what? Sometimes you just got to go through the hardest things to get yourself through are the ones you should work the most at. And I kind of live by that. There's actually some saying of that sort. So whatever you find the most difficult to do are the ones you should work on. Because when you get over those things, the things that it opens up to you are the greatest experiences in life. And that's what it did to me. So I got over it. I realized that just understand, as long as you're safe and you do it right, the goal at the end is unbelievable. I will always remember seeing that cave for the first time, the most beautiful cave in Massachusetts.
Do you think another human had been in there?
Oh yeah, people have been there all the way to the end long before us. This one we didn't discover. That one was very old and very well known, but it's just awe-inspiring. So, I'm sorry, yes?
Are you familiar with Antelope Canyon?
Which one?
Antelope Canyon. It's in Arizona.
No,
It was a cave where you'd walk in there.
Yep.
And water, because of the stone, had formed it and washed it out.
Yep.
And there's, I guess, a few different artifacts or something there. But they were very concerned about water from a long distance away, raining, even in 1 inch, because it keeps funneling down.
Oh.
And that place could fill up right to the top.
Yes.
That's what basically created it, the water running through and basically carving out the stone. It's magnificent. You look it up, Antelope Canyon.
Yeah, this place is like that in New England. Actually, I know of an incident in New York where it's a cave. I'm part of the National Speleological Society, so I have access to a lot of caves and that public generally don't, because you need to know what you're doing before you go in. Don't worry, if you want to do things with caves, the community helps you out. We have regular events where you can come. We'll bring you the caves if you like it. We'll start teaching you. So we're not saying no, we're just saying no until we show you how to do it right. But there's a cave in New York where it's locked on the top, so you unlock it and you rope drop 100 feet or more into it, and then you lock it on the way in so no one can come in that's not a caver. And then you do the cave and then you come out. It's supposed to be a sunny weekend. They went in, and before they dropped, they put the key in a little rock shelf right near the entrance. And they dropped in, went in, and then suddenly torrential rainstorm. The entire cave flooded. It was getting so high they had to go to the highest point of the cave and huddle together to keep warm and hope it didn't keep going up. And eventually it receded, and they finally got to their ropes and they climbed out, and they hoped the key didn't wash away, because no one knew that something bad happens. They didn't know when someone would show up, they could have been caught in that cave for a long time, but the key was there and they unlocked themselves.
Wow.
So yeah, there is risks like that involved. That's why we want you to be trained before you go in.
Have you ever gotten lost in a cave?
No, not in caves there. Caves in New England are pretty much straight lines. You can't get lost. You can get stuck. You can get stuck, but the only time you usually get stuck is you don't realize. So you can drop in through a tight squeeze, but going up is harder because you contract your muscles. and you get bigger and you can't fit through. So that's why I never go alone, because if that happens, just put your hands up and let them lift you up. So if you go alone, you can get
How
stuck.
about the caves with the stalactites and the stalagmites?
There's not a lot in Massachusetts.
No, I know, but we went through the wizard.
Blu-ray Cave
Blueberry Cap.
in Pennsylvania.
Cameron,
Yeah, I know of those caves, and there's also in
Did
New
they
York.
find anything in there, like any kind of design?
Most of those caves, no, because those caves are usually sealed up and they've opened, like the ones, some here, the cavers here will find the blowholes, as they call them, and we will just dig and dig and dig and dig. We know there's a cave down there because of the volume of air. Next, boom, opens up. Within the past 10 years, about 3 or 4 caves, thousands of feet long, have been found in New England. It's one of them becoming the 3rd largest cave in New England now. They beat out others. Yes.
Yeah, the curvature on the stone there suggests that at some point that cave took that form because it was filled with water and that all eroded away. So, depending on how the hydrology is, that could fill again.
Oh, it could. It absolutely could. And my friend here, matter of fact, this visit we went on, he went with me to the end the first time. This was now, it's got to be like 10 years later, and he couldn't make it to the end. He got scared because he asked me, he said, what happens if it floods? What are we going to do? And I'm like, oh, we'll be fine. We just go ahead and hide. And then I started joking with him. I thought he wasn't serious. But at one point, finally, when I went to the big first drop where it opens up, he was up there and he looks down at me and he goes, I can't go. And then he just, boom, went. And it's hard to climb back up yourself in the spot. I'm like, don't go. But I could get up. And then when we got out, and he just, I have a video of him saying, I can't do the cave beat me. The cave beat me. I can't do it anymore. So because, it could flood, but if you know what to do, you just got to know how to take care of yourself. And yes.
So more common than the caves, are people doing like shelter rocks and preaching rocks? Like we have one in Bourne.
Oh yeah.
We have one in Canton, where I was from.
We do. I do shelters. I do shelter rocks. I consider those they're caves in the most generous term.
And have you found anything like on those rocks with using the techniques other than saying cave?
Yeah. Not the pictographs. I found inscriptions, mostly settlers, colonial, late colonial inscriptions. The rocks, there's definitely some. There's some in the Berkshires I'm going to find. There are Indian profiles that were done by probably people from the 1700s, about 4 of them. I have to go hunt them down. They're probably covered by moss now. But I have a friend who that's all he does, goes for rocks.
Yeah.
He finds rocks all over New England. They call him Berkshire Mountain Man, but also he's the great rock man. He knows any rock in New England, Massachusetts mostly, that's where he lives in the Berkshires. If you ask him about it, he's been there. And he was just down this area just recently. He's retired now, so a lot of time on his hands. I don't have that time, so. Any other questions? No?
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.